Welcome back. Attorney General Pam Bondi's days within the Trump administration might be numbered. A source privy to private conversations and speaking on condition of anonymity told MS Now President Trump is discussing firing Bondi, dissatisfied with her handling of the Epstein files and how she's wielded the DOJ to go after his foes. Not the actual function of DOJ, we should add. MS Now reached out to the White House for comment and was told the president says Attorney General Pam Bondi is a wonderful person and she's doing a good job. Let's bring in MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian, and here on set with me, former federal prosecutor and Politico senior writer Ankush Khardori. Ken, I'll start with you. The reports of frustration here are not necessarily new, but it's the potential action to replace her that would be an escalation if it happens. Big if, but talk us through what that would look like and what we understand about the situation now.
Yeah, it absolutely would be a big escalation, Ali. And look, Pam Bondi is obviously in trouble, particularly on the Hill, over her handling of the Epstein files. But it really does seem that Donald Trump is dissatisfied because she hasn't gone as far as he would like in essentially prosecuting his perceived enemies. And we say that knowing that Pam Bondi has shattered a 50-year post-Watergate tradition of Justice Department independence, and she's bent the Justice Department to the will of the White House in the way that no modern attorney general ever has. But she and her deputy, Todd Blanche, are constrained by aspects of our system, like the grand jury system. So, you know, they've had cases against potential Trump opponents that have collapsed. And we all remember back in September when Donald Trump issued that Truth Social post that may have actually been intended as a private message to Pam Bondi. Let's read from it because it's worth reviewing. Remember, he said, Pam, I've reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time, all talk, no action. Nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia James? Now, since then, the cases against James Comey and Letitia James have collapsed, but other cases against John Brennan and Adam Schiff and the grand conspiracy case they're running down in Florida, those continue to move forward, but apparently not fast enough for Donald Trump. And so he is musing with his aides, as he does often, we know, about potentially replacing him with other figures. It's not clear, though, that the result, that anyone else is going to do any better along these lines, because, again, we have a grand jury system. We have judges who are standing in the way of the Justice Department bringing prosecutions based on thin and specious evidence, Sally.
Exactly. It's not like they're blocking the prosecutions because they don't have a personal agreement with them. It's that they lack sufficient evidence underpinning them in the first place. But then I also think, Ken, you bring up a good point. A, the musings are sort of part and parcel to being in Trump world. But B, you can't replace someone with no one. So to that end, the New York Times has reporting around the idea of replacing Bondi with EPA Commissioner Lee Zeldin, though no final decision has obviously been made. Still, that's according to 4 people familiar with those conversations. And I wonder, Ankush, if it's Lee Zeldin, which is just one of the names that I personally have heard in this constant swirl of who might replace who, it strikes me that he is a former congressman. And how might that impact his dealings with, say, the House Oversight Committee's probe that continues into the Epstein files?
Well, I mean, look, ordinarily you would think, well, maybe he could, you know, be a little bit more of a peacemaker and sort of diffuse some of the tensions between the House Oversight Committee and the Attorney General.
Which is what they're hoping at DHS with Mueller.
Right. I find it hard to believe that that'll happen in this instance because Bondi, on the relevant subjects, which appear to be the handling of the Epstein files and prosecuting Trump's political enemies, she has done what he wanted. She's done what he wanted. And the Epstein file stuff, the production by DOJ, yes, it's been a debacle. But let's not forget, the fact that we're even talking about the Epstein files here in 2026 is mostly Trump's fault, and J.D. Vance's, and Dan Bongino, and Kash Patel, and all of their allies' fault. So I'm not, I've had plenty of criticism for Pam Bondi, but it's it's ironic, essentially, that he's the grounds on which he's choosing to remove her are kind of the worst grounds of them all.
Yeah, I mean, I've long said about the Epstein stuff, the call was very much coming from inside the House on how this all began. But, Ken, I want to just stay on this point of Epstein and oversight, because the Oversight Committee has subpoenaed Bondi to testify about her handling of the Epstein files release. In theory, she's set to appear on April 14th. That's not really firm. But how might a potential departure impact her having to show up for that?
Well, obviously, if she is not the Attorney General, she wouldn't have to show up. So that would impact it quite dramatically. But, she's been working behind the scenes with Republicans to try to avoid a sworn deposition, to try to appease them, and so that she doesn't have to do this, because this is a rather dramatic step of requiring her to come up on the Hill and testify under oath. There is a great dissatisfaction. And I take Ankush's point about she's done sort of everything they could have asked lately about the Epstein files, but she set herself up to fail. We all remember when she handed out those binders to influencers suggesting that there were these dramatic new disclosures that she was making in the Epstein files at the beginning of the administration, and it turned out to be a lot of nothing. And remember when she said that she had the Epstein client list on her desk, and then she had to later acknowledge there was no client list. So she really sort of set false expectations at the beginning, only to have to come around and issue a statement saying, look, there really is no conspiracy theory here. There were nobody else we could have charged. And the DOJ is not thrilled with having to go through this process and release all these documents, but they're doing it pursuant to law. And then there's been a whole bunch of mistakes in the way they've done it. So she's clearly not made a lot of people happy with the way she's handled the Epstein files, and she set herself up essentially to fail with those disclosures in the beginning.
I will say I'm not sure that her no longer being Attorney General will be sufficient for at least Democrats and some interested Republicans on the House Oversight Committee. But I guess we'll see what we ultimately see if this comes to pass.